Welcome back to Comic Book History. This is what I'm talking about. This is the first video I've done in a couple months because I didn't have anything to talk about. Now I do. I'm going to talk about this video, the comic career of the recent passing of Stan the Man Lee. Yes, I'm talking about Stan Lee, one of the most influential figures in comic book history. And a man who's responsible for creating a boatload of characters. At least about 50% of the Marvel comic characters created since their conception back in 1939. Though he wasn't working on some Marvel comics back then. No, he wasn't. Now, his career started back in 1942 with his first comic being Captain America Comics #3, where he, in the first issue he did something drastic. He switched out the square shield that Captain America had for the first couple issues, switched out for the iconic circular shield, and also responsible for the creation of Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull. He also basically inadvertently created the infamous conception of a retcon, where he revealed the Red Skull who dated back in issue 1 was not the actual Red Skull. Nope, it was an agent of his, so he was considered to be the second Red Skull. Yeah, officially there have been about 4 of them. You have Johann Schmidt, the fake guy from issue 1, the communist one from the 50s, and of course his daughter Sin, who was the 4th Red Skull. And then pretty much like not long after that, he had to take time off from reading comic books to participate in World War II. Yeah, he enlisted. Though he didn't do any fighting, he did do a lot of writing for the army. And then after the war was over, he went back and read comic books. He did some anthology books here and there. Of course, during this period of time, he did create the character Groot. And then in 1961, from a documentary I've heard, that at the behest of his wife Joan, that why don't you create a group? And this, of course, is by legend, mind you. That the reason why this group was created was because the Justice League, actually one of 2 groups Stan Lee created, was because Justice League America was actually selling really well, and there is a very popular myth that Stan Lee was golfing with the editor of DC Comics at that point. The editor, I think his name was Julius Schwartz. Yes, the guy responsible for pretty much starting up the Silver Age of comics for DC Comics back in the late 1950s. Yeah, the myth was that, or at least the legend is, that Stan Lee was golfing with him, and of course, Julius Schwartz was talking about the sale of Just Like America, and so came with the idea of creating his own group himself. So, first group he created for Marvel Comics was the Fantastic Four. Yep. They proved a big hit, so in 1962 he created Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, and the Hulk, all in the span of 1 year. Yeah, all in the span of 1 year. I don't remember who he created in 1963, but in 1964 he created Daredevil. Yep, he created Daredevil. And in 1965 he created the Avengers and the X-Men. Of course, also during this period in 1962, he also created the character of Hank Pym, aka the first Ant-Man. He also created the Wasp, Galactus, Silver Surfer, Black Panther, Hawkeye, Black Widow, a boatload of characters. Probably his last major creation he did for Marvel Comics in the 1960s was in fact the original Captain Marvel. Yep, he created him. You look him up. Look at this guy. Stan Lee is credited for creating him. And after that, Stan Lee didn't do very much, basically, in the form of comic books. He tried to, let's say, pass in the comics somebody else, which he did. He passed the books like Avengers and Daredevil to Roy Thomas. I believe Roy Thomas did also take up Iron Man, along with Don Heck. In the case of Fantastic Four, this book Lee actually stuck with for the first 100 issues before handing off to somebody else. In the case of Amazing Spider-Man, this one he technically did stay first 100 issues, though he did skip 1 issue. He finally left at issue 116. But yeah, a lot of the other comics he did didn't stay very long. This is also during the period of time I should point out, though, that in the 1960s, comics would come out every 2 months, unlike nowadays, where they come out monthly, or in the case and occasion, might come out twice a month. For many reasons. Well, DC still occasionally does it. But yeah, that was the common practice for Marvel Comics in the early 60s. And that was a practice up until around 1970. Yeah, I'm not really sure who came up with the concept of switching comic books to come out from every couple months to basically every month. I have no idea who came up with that concept, but whoever did, brand stroke genius that was, put out more issues per year. Yep, and this next story I've heard about Lee, this is actually particularly true. This is actually toward the end of his run for Amazing Spider-Man. During the last few years of his run for the book, he was contacted by the Department of Health. This was during the period of time Richard Nixon was president. He was contacted by them to do a PSA story for any comics he did on drugs, an anti-drug PSA. He's like, sure. So he came up with a 3-part story of Amazing Spider-Man, which became one of the most famous Amazing Spider-Man stories of all time. Now, here's the thing. In the 1950s, there was this thing called the Comic Code Authority. You might occasionally see it in older comic books stretching as far back as the 1990s. It's a little thing they put like right in the upper left-hand corner just below the Marvel logo. The approved by the Comic Code Authority. And almost every single comic had this on there. Except for 3 issues. I believe it was like, if I remember reading it, I think it was like issues 94 to about 96. It was 3-part involving the Green Goblin, of course, revealing that Harry Osborn was in fact a drug addict. And it also showed off the side effects of how drugs basically deal people. So, this story was initially Stan Lee went to Comic Code Authority with approval. They actually rejected it. Yes, the Comic Code Authority rejected it. So Lee took it to his editor. I think it was Marvel Goodman at that point. And he's asked if they could run it. He said, sure, we'll run it. And it proved to be one of the most successful comic books in the 1970s. So much so, the Comic Code Authority is like, okay, you want to do these comics? Fine. We'll update our standards. Yeah, standards. Some of the policies, what I've heard from the Comic Code Authority, were really stupid. You couldn't have vampires. You couldn't have werewolves. I mean, I get the fact, yes, you can't have like nudity in the comics. Fine, whatever. At least Marvel Comics in the 70s created an alternate imprint, basically a predecessor to the Max imprint, the black and white comics, which basically were adult-themed comics. Excuse me, there's also an infamous story involving Marv Wolfman. He had to fight the Comic Code Authority over his own name because his name was Wolfman. And the Comic Code Authority at that point says, no werewolves. And he pointed out, that's my name. Deal with it. Yeah. And of course, this later on inspired Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams to create one of the most famous Green Arrow stories of all time, Snowbirds Don't Fly, when they outed Roy Harper as a drug addict. Yep. And one of Neil Adams' most famous covers, where you have Green Lantern showing Green Arrow that his ward, Roy Harper, aka Speedy, is a heroin addict. And of course, in that particular comic, do you know what happened afterwards? Roy Harper threw him out of his house. And where did Roy Harper go? He went right to Green Arrow's girlfriend's house, the Black Canary, who in the 2000s they later married. Yeah. And in the 1970s, Stan Lee basically, of course, trying to kill comics, where he still occasionally write them, tried to get comics adapted to TV. In the 60s, he kind of was loosely successful, thanks to stuff like the Spider-Man 60s animated TV show, the really weird Marvel superhero show. I've watched some of it. It is one of the most bizarre cartoons I've ever seen, where they take the panels and they just have the lips move. Yeah. The people who made this show were really lazy. And it had 4 segments. Iron Man, the Hulk, Captain America, and Namor. Oh yeah, the X-Men show up in this show in their first appearance as the comics, except they weren't called the X-Men. They were called the Allies for Peace. I'm not kidding about this. Look it up. That is seriously what they called themselves. And there's this famous clip on YouTube where you have Professor Xavier who says, my brain senses danger. My brain senses danger. Like saying it like 3 or 4 times. Like, seriously? Yep. Of course, in the 70s, we got ourselves stuff like The Incredible Hulk live-action TV series, which was a pretty damn good show. Though, in case you're wondering, why wasn't he called Bruce Banner in the show? Because the producers of the show thought the name Bruce was gay. Seriously, that's the reason why. So they changed his name to David. And of course, also started up well, I've heard, one of the worst Spider-Man projects of all time, the Spider-Man live-action TV series of the 1970s, where he fought none of his villains and had maybe a few of his supporting characters show up and basically fought made-up villains they made for the show. Of course, they made that show as a response to the success of The Incredible Hulk. And of course, there was some cartoons, like there was a Fantastic Four cartoon, though the Human Torch wasn't in it, due to a myth. This is a legend that the reason why the Human Torch was not included in that cartoon was to prevent kids from basically setting themselves on fire. That was actually not the reason why. It was because, believe it or not, there was plans to make a Human Torch film. No joke, there seriously was plans for that. Yeah, there seriously was. And of course, in the 80s, we got stuff like the Spider-Man cartoon 1981, Spider-Man's Amazing Friends, really damn good show, and one of the clips of that show did show up in the film Missing in Action. Yeah, it was the episode featuring the Shocker. I don't remember what episode it was, but I know it was the episode featuring the Shocker. It was all stuff like the Incredible TV show, and that was it for cartoons-wise. This is basically help Stan Lee. This is Stan Lee doing this. And in the 90s, we had stuff like the awesome X-Men cartoon, and of course the Spider-Man cartoon, Silver Surfer, Fantastic Four, the awful Avengers United They Stand cartoon, which featured the lineup of the West Coast branch for some strange reason. No idea why. And of course, Marvel 5 bankruptcy in the late 70s. Of course, there was one other cartoon show, Spider-Man Unlimited. Of course, that was ended due to Marvel's bankruptcy in the late 1980s. In the 2000s, Stan Lee formed Stan Lee Entertainment, which was not a successful venture for him. And of course, around this also same period of time, he basically jumped ship to DC Comics to do a series of one-shots called Stan Lee Created DC Universe. And from what I've heard, these were very weird. I have never read them, but I've heard some of that. One was actually pretty good from what I've heard. Was one when he created Batman. Excuse me. And some of the other characters he did like some bizarre things, like he made Flash a woman, he made Wonder Woman not Greek, and not for them to scare some woman from Mexico. Superman was still an alien, but he just was talking about preventing traffic accidents and stuff like that. Yeah, that was particularly his style back then. Of course, he also worked with some famous artists who worked for DC Comics at that point. People like Kevin McGuire, met the guy. This guy's a damn good artist. He also worked with Jim Lee, a bunch of different artists when he was working on these series of one shots. Yeah, there was also Pow. He basically helped start that company up. One of the companies he started basically filed bankruptcy, and he basically got sort of confused or whatever. Yeah. And then there was also the infamous TV show, like, Who Wants to Be a Superhero? A show that lasted for 2 years. Not kidding about this. And I've heard this show produced some of the worst one-shots of all time. Of course, in the late 90s, we also, of course, those are thinking though, what about movies based upon characters you created? Well, that wouldn't happen until we had the release of the X-Men. That was the first Stan Lee film released in theaters. Though he did make his first cameo appearance in one of the Incredible Hulk films, in a movie called The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, which also featured the first live-action experience of Daredevil in an all-black costume. And it looked nothing like his iconic costume he would wear in the comic books. Yeah. Oh yeah, and here's the thing about his cameo appearance. He was the foreman of a jury, and when the Hulk was lifting up the bench, now Lee wanted to jump off the thing himself, but the director of the film said, no, we're having a stunt double do that. Yeah, though he didn't have his cameo was uncredited, and he had no lines. He did finally show up in the X-Men movie. As a matter of fact, he showed up in pretty much every single X-Men related movie to date, except for the Wolverine films. Yeah, he never showed up for the Wolverine ones, as far as I know. And he didn't show up for those films. He didn't show up in Blade, nor Howard the Duck, because those two characters, he had nothing to do with these characters' creation. He has worked with those people before. Yeah, he's worked with the creators of these characters, but never actually involved with the creation of these characters. And, of course, we all have the Spider-Man films, the ones that Sam Raimi directed. The really kind of good but bad Fantastic Four films from 2005 and 2007. Of course, it was that awful reboot that came out a few years ago. And in 2008, we had the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the success of Iron Man 1. Yep. And if you look at all the films that feature that basically are part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I would say like out of all those films, of course, there's also Ghost Rider, which Stan Lee didn't have a cameo in that one either. In the case of the MCU films so far, the only film where the main character was not a creation of Stan Lee, the first one was Captain America. He didn't make a cameo in that for a very damn good reason. Well, actually, two reasons. One, because he created a majority of the characters in the film, and two, first comic he created. Yep. And some of his cameos were so funny. Like in Iron Man 1, he was taken by Hugh Hefner. In Iron Man 2, he was Larry King. Excuse me. I don't remember what his cameo was for Iron Man 3. Incredible Hulk, he was the guy who purchased a soda, and this was the soda that had the Hulk's blood in it. They were showing people into Hulk monsters, which they never show on screen for some strange reason. In the first Captain America film, he was a general, where he says, "I thought he'd be taller." Yep. And of course, he has shown up in pretty much all three Avenger films. He showed up in Captain America Winter Soldier. He's considered this to be one of his favorite cameos of all time. He has the most funniest line where he's a security guard at the Smithsonian, which has the World War II Captain America costume, and he says, "I am so fired." Of course, the Captain America costume just disappears. It's one of the most funniest cameos he's ever done. In Civil War, he cameoed as a FedEx delivery guy. In Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, he met up with the Watchers. Yeah, he got to space. As for how he got to space, the movie never bothered to explain it. And his cameo from Doctor Strange. Now, Doctor Strange, he's involved. He wrote the first comic Doctor Strange showed up in. He doesn't credit himself. This was an interview he did back in 2008. That he had pretty much almost nothing to do with the creation of Doctor Strange. Yeah, it was all Steve Ditko. Yep, the late Steve Ditko, who just passed away a few months ago. Yep. Yeah, it was all his creation, and of course the character, appearance-wise, was based on the late Vincent Price. Yeah, here's the thing about his cameo from Doctor Strange. That was not directed by the director of the film. Oh no, that was directed by the guy who Marvel has since fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, James Gunn. Yes, James Gunn directed a Stan Lee cameo in a film that's not Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah, I'm not kidding about that. That is completely true. Yep, this is one of those unknown things you hear about the Doctor Strange film. When I heard about this, I'm like, really? James Gunn directed the Stan Lee cameo? Awesome. His cameo was a guy basically reading a book on a bus. Yeah, and there's also, in the first Avengers film, I remember his cameo very well, where he says to Cap, "You should get her number." To a waitress. It was so funny. Yeah, actually, this was the lead scene. The other cameo he did was on a TV screen. It says, "Avengers New York, please." Even though he himself created the Avengers back in the 60s. Yep. I'm trying to think, what was their cameos? In Dora Dark World, his line was, he asked a question of, "May I have my shoe back, please?" This is, of course, when he was in a mental asylum. Yes, a mental asylum. Stan Lee, a mental asylum. In Black Panther, it was in a casino, which was also the same casino where the main character ran into Everett Ross, who he met in Captain America with Civil War. Yeah, I don't really remember what his cameo was in that film. Actually, no, it was the FedEx guy. In the first Guardians film, it was Rocky Raccoon calling him a pervert because, he was hanging out with two girls. Yeah. And here's the thing about Guardians. Only I would say about 2 characters who appear in the film are actually his creations. In that film, it was just Groot and Ronan. Yeah, that's it. Those are the only 2 characters he created in that film that he himself created. If you look at all the rest of the films in Marvel Cinematic Universe, the first Iron Man film, just Iron Man, Pepper, and Happy. And of course, Howard Stark, yes, he did kind of create him. Yeah, even though his co-creator is Don Heck. Let's see, what else? I'm trying to think, what other character in that film was a creation of his? The guy who helped Tony Stark in that cave build his first suit. That was also a character created by Stan Lee. In Incredible Hulk, it was just Hulk himself, Betty Ross, and Jenna Ross. Abomination, I don't think was a creation of his. No. Thor, pretty much almost every single comic-based character who appeared in the film was in fact his own creation, except for the Destroyer. In Winter Soldier, in First Avenger, it was just the General, the one played by Tommy Lee Jones, Peggy Carter, the characters who appear part of his Howling Commandos. Yeah, Lee created pretty much almost all of them. Let's see. Oh yeah, in the first Iron Man film, basically Nick Fury. Even though that, yes, he is kind of based upon the 616 Nick Fury mixed in with the character created by Mark Millar. Yeah, so that's a character. In Iron Man 2, it was just Hawkeye. It was just, well, Black Widow. And that was it, just Black Widow. She was the only one. Hawkeye, of course, did show up in Thor 1. Mm-hmm. In Avengers, the only ones I can think of that were his creations, well, the ones showed up the first time in the film, off the top of my head, was actually none. Actually, it was, yeah, there was none of them. Yeah, Thanos, despite the fact this was his first appearance, Thanos is not a character created by Stan Lee. That was Jim Starlin. Mm-hmm. Iron Man 3, nope. Thor the Dark World, no, not that I can think of. I think they did have one of Thor's brothers show up in the film, the guy who's considered the god of war. I'm trying to think, though. In Winter Soldier, I think it was... No, I don't think Crossbones was a creation. I think it was Steve Eichelhart. I think after the first Captain America, I think the next time they actually had a character he helped pretty much as credited for creating was not until Avengers 2 when the Vision showed up. And Ultron. Yeah, he's credited for creating both of these characters, despite the fact Roy Thomas had more to do with these characters than Stan Lee. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also Avengers Age of Ultron was also the first in-universe appearance of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Mm-hmm. Let's see. In Ant-Man, it was just, well, Hank Pym and Jenna Von Dyne. No, she doesn't physically appear in the film. She appears in the second film, actually. I'm trying to think. Yeah, that was it as far as I can recall for Phase 2. Phase 3, let's see. In the case of Captain America Civil War, just Spider-Man. Yeah, he was the only one I could think of. Let's see. Oh yeah, he did also make a cameo in Venom. Yeah, despite the fact he had nothing to do with Venom at all. The only reason why I think he showed up because Venom is a character associated with Spider-Man, which Lee himself did create. Let's see, was there any other characters? Let me think here about this. Oh yeah, in Thor Ragnarok, he was a barber who shaved Thor's head. Yep. Trying to think there was anything else. In Guardians Volume 2, Ego. Yep, Ego was definitely one of his creations. Yeah, Jack Kirby created him too. Yeah, Ego made his first parent issue of Thor of all things. Yeah, I thought that was bizarre. I'm trying to think, was there anything else for characters appearing from their Stanley creations? Let me think about this. In the Spider-Man Homecoming film, pretty much the Vulture. Yeah, it was Vulture, Shocker, Scorpion, and the Terrible Tinkerer. Yeah, these guys all were creations of Stan Lee. And of course, there was all, well, yeah, that's is. Oh yeah, and also May, she first showed up in Civil War, which was referenced in Spider-Man Homecoming. Let's see, in Ant-Man the Wasp, which came out this year, I think Lee did make a cameo in that one, and the only character he created that showed up in the film was Egghead. Yeah, Egghead. That is one of his That's one of his characters, as far as I can tell. Yeah, I was so surprised they brought in Egghead, especially since he is an Ant-Man villain. I'm trying to think figure at some point maybe he's one of the villains, but no, he appeared in a flashback, and apparently he was no rival of Hank Pym's. In the case of most recent film, no, like a lot of the characters made a first appearance in Infinity War was all characters created by Jonathan Hickman, with the exception of Thanos himself. Yeah, that was the weird thing. Hickman basically got like a lot of attention with Infinity War because the film itself was partially based upon not only the Infinity War, the Thanos Quest comic from the '90s. Let's see, yeah, also Infinity Gauntlet and also Infinity. Yep, basic comics created by written by Jim Starlin and of course John Hickman. Yeah, and that's it for characters shown in the films. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of his cameos tend to be very funny, and I did hear a complaint about when he made his cameo in Iron Man and Black Panther. He said that he was the most distracting thing about the film. A Stan Lee cameo. I mean, what the heck is wrong with a Stan Lee cameo? It's a Stan Lee cameo. It makes a cameo in every single film that he's basically responsible for creating any of his characters. And this cameo is only a good like 30 seconds of screen time, like good like minute or two at best. I have never found a Stan Lee cameo to be bad at all. I just don't know why this idiot thought it was a thing where he thought that Stan Lee showing up was a distraction. Stan Lee is not a distraction. He's there for humor. And also fan service for also he's there for people who are fans of these characters. He created these characters, people like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko back in the 60s. Get over, you stupid idiot. Yes, I'm not sure who this idiot was, but this idiot really needs to get off his high horse when it came to Stan Lee cameos. I mean, come on, the guy shows up in like almost every single Mario movie there is. So you kind of expect him to show up. If it's a Spider movie, you can expect him to show up in that one too. Because in Spider-Man Homecoming, I was expecting his cameo. And his cameo was basically a guy named Gary who was criticizing Spider-Man for stopping a guy who was trying to break into his own car. No, seriously, that was seriously his cameo. Yeah. Trying to think though. Yeah, Lee's national major creation he did for Marvel Comics was a guy called Ravage. Yeah, Ravage. I've read it. It's one of the most weirdest comics I've read. Those of you wondering who created She-Hulk, Stan Lee. Yep, She-Hulk was created by Stan Lee. Yeah, I thought that was his last major creation, but no, it was Ravage. As far as I know, I don't think he created any more characters after that. No, I don't think he ever did, but if it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't get a lot of these cartoons, the live-action TV shows, the films, the Netflix shows. Of the 5 Netflix shows, Marvel, of course, they've since canceled 2 of them, Luke Cage and Iron Fist. The only character who actually is a creation of Stan Lee, who is the main character of those, is Daredevil. Oh, and yes, he also created the Purple Man, who is the main villain of Jessica Jones Season 1, played by David Tennant. Yeah, he created him. He's also even curious, though, when was the first time Purple Man showed up in the comics? Daredevil number 7 from 1965. No, seriously, that was the first time he showed up in the comics. Yeah, Wade even basically got a chance to write this character. Yeah, this is how weird this guy is. In case you're wondering, this is a guy who basically has purple skin, and the guy's got kids. Yes, one of course is the Purple Woman, who was actually his daughter, and of course there's also Purple Children, who their conception was particularly not unusual for the Purple Man, or he hypnotizes women with his magical charm and basically sleeps with these women. And that is how these Purple Children are created. Yeah, basically with rape. Yeah, I'm trying to think though. Why was the Purple Man killed off sooner for how many bad stuff he did? Why did it take Bendis recently to have Kraven the Hunter kill him off by shooting him in the head? Yeah. I'm sure Lee didn't mind the fact he killed off his character. Yeah, it's one of the very few characters that Lee had killed off in recent years. The other one was Electro in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 4, number 6. Yeah, they killed off Electro prior to the Clone Conspiracy. I have no idea why Dan Slott thought this was a good idea to do. I mean, this is a character created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. I'm not talking about the female Electro. I'm talking about Max Dillon, the original Electro. Why did they kill him off? No idea. Though I've heard something in Spider-Man Far From Home, the main villain of that film was going to be Mysterio, which I hope they go for is a look that's based upon his comic book look. And I appreciate what they did with the Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming when they actually gave him the fluffy collar, which he got from the comics himself. Even though, yes, his suit is like almost nothing like the way he is in 616. Like, though it's partially based upon his Marvel Knights look, which I do appreciate that look, by the way. It's my favorite looks. Yeah. Otherwise, though, Stan Lee did a lot of stuff for the comic industry. And like I said, if it had been for him, we would not see stuff like Marvel TV, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the X-Men films, or Fantastic Four. He basically got the ball rolling for those stuff. And he started this stuff back in the 1970s. But his career started back in 1940s. Those of you curious though, have I ever met Stan Lee? Nope. Never have. I never got a chance to. For a very good reason. The guy had an expensive autograph. It cost like $100 for his autograph. I wasn't gonna pay that much for an autograph. I mean, yeah, the guy also had long lines for an autograph. I mean, I probably would have thought it probably would have been a better idea for me to get a picture with him instead. But I never thought of it. My loss. But if I get a chance to talk to people who actually get a chance to actually work with Stan Lee, I'll talk to them about Stan Lee. Yeah. Though he was one of those many comic creators I've always wanted to meet, but never got a chance to. A lot with Steve Ditko, Lee Wein, Jack the King Kirby, though he passed away like 11 years before I got into comics. I would love to meet this guy. I would love to meet Dwayne McDuffie. Yeah, I would love to meet him. Darwin Cook. And that's it. The only comic creator who passed away recently that I did get a chance to meet him before he passed away was Bernie Wrightstein. Yeah, he was the only one, surprisingly. Yeah, though I did hear there was rumors about Lee passing away prior to he passed away yesterday, where he was in the hospital this year. He was suffering from pneumonia of all things, which is kind of weird for him to do. But yeah, so that's particularly it for this comic history on Stan Lee. It's just the highlights of stuff I've heard about him, or I've read about him, or he himself talked about. Because some of the stuff he talked about, especially if you see him on stuff like Comic Book Men, he's so fascinating to listen to. And I would have loved to have a sit-down interview with him, but never got a chance to. And now I never will because he passed away. Yeah. I kind of wish they'd make a biopic about Stan Lee, because I think it'd be fascinating. Or at least a documentary about him. He at least needs something. I mean, nowadays people just only think of him as the old man who makes cameos in Marvel movies. I know about him through all the comics I've read, basically, he wrote. Yeah, I've read like a good chunk of them. I haven't read every single one of them, but I have read a good chunk of them. Yep. So yeah, that's it for comic history. Next video I'm going to plan to do is Black Clover. Yep. But until we see you in the next video. Bye.